So Rohit had a great question. How does security evolve or devolve when it comes to the organization moving from pre-IPO to IPO, or from IPO to or into a private equity firm? Does this open up opportunities or add more challenges for the CISO during migration?
So let me take a crack at this first. So because I sit on board of private companies, also public companies, and the reporting requirements are very different for public company versus private companies. There's a lot of specific items have to go into 10Ks in the disclosure, especially for risks. How do you have to communicate certain risks today to investors? And if you're aware of them, you must communicate. Now, there is no specific requirement to report cybersecurity risks today. There are some in the financial industries, but not in general. That said, more and more institutional investors are looking at cybersecurity as an ESG risk. ESG means environmental, societal, and governance. So ESG risk is a big factor now to evaluate companies, and cybersecurity tends to be rolled under ESG. Many large enterprises are being asked by their investor base to prepare cybersecurity statement or disclose cybersecurity risks as part of the ESG reporting. And so that trend basically points to a public company would have much more rigorous reporting requirements on cybersecurity initiatives, whether it's today or coming down the pipeline. So that is one platform the CISO can use to ask for more budget into his or her organization. And another thing is, if you have a digital expert on the board, that may be a good way to work with the board for understanding that cybersecurity is a must-have, not a nice-have. So these are type of things that public company CISOs must do. Now, for private company, if you're prepping for IPO, then your requirements are very similar. You have to show that your company has adequate security measures in order to stand up to that level of scrutiny. But if you're early stage as a private company, you also have to think about your company may be bought, right? Or at another end of the spectrum, being bought by a PE firm. Again, these acquiring entities going to evaluate you on financials, on growth, as well as your IT infrastructure and cybersecurity postures. May not be as rigorous as a public company reporting, but those things must be done. So these are also talking points with the executives and management to acquire more budget.
Yeah, great comments, Tracy. And I would add also that it depends where your organization is in terms of the amount of tech debt that exists in terms of the infrastructure. And oftentimes, the security challenges are not only centered around the volume of data and how available that data is to your global community and how many third parties and fourth parties you're working with, but then also, how much of that infrastructure has been sort of left to itself versus how much of it has had the time and attention to build out, good operations. And good enough is for most, the checkbox. And getting away from sort of the compliance driven type of security to more of the, actual security that has to do with, long-term thinking. The second component that I would look at is, when you look at your organization, not only from pre and post IPO, but then also pre and post cloud, is how well does your security organization adapt, and how do those policies adapt from an on-premise to a cloud infrastructure? So, when you think about reporting, how able are you to provide the same reports from your cloud services and your cloud microservices and all of your other, applications running in a disparate number of places versus what you used to have access to on premise. And so there's a lot of requirement in both public companies and then also in PE-owned companies to provide specific metrics and, to be able to manage that data. So, staying on top of where you have access to the data and then also how you can report on it in a very consistent way. So those are some of the additional challenges because they keep piling up. I was thinking, the title of CISO should be what now? And Marnie, I'm sure you can relate to that.
I think both Chancy and Didi, tackled this one really well. I think the really, to summarize or the core point for me along a lot of these decisions is around reporting, and just adding a quick one is also around audit and regulatory needs as well. That's historically been one of the underlying reasons why CISOs has become a full-time job for many of them, and so as a result, that is one way to think about how much and how important it is to the company. Although obviously, reporting and compliance doesn't mean security. And so there are also going to be different organizations that think about how much they care about security and how much they want to invest ahead of the puck as well. And for that reason, CISOs have to spend a lot of time understanding the organizations that they might be joining to get a sense in terms of what really matters to them. Is it primarily reporting? Is it primarily compliance? Is it primarily, we talk about engineering many times over, but there's every organization is different, and CISOs get the pleasure of figuring that one out, and we can certainly be helpful to them on that front as VCs as well.
And I think that part is evolving also, Will. I think there are companies that thought, even companies that are fairly well established, thought their CISOs were there to be their technical security. Let's put the tools and tech in place, and are suddenly realizing as their investors are asking for that ESG statement and asking for more information in the risk disclosure that actually probably they should be involving the CISOs in that discussion. I don't think all companies are there, and even looking at the conversation, financial services generally is far and away above, from a maturity standpoint, from a risk management standpoint. Everybody speaks risk. I would still argue there are some that are probably, that works for the big banks. I'm thinking there are some small and mid-sized financial institutions and insurance companies that probably are still not quite there. I think we as CISOs need to understand that those are things that should be expected of us, and go ahead and go to the leadership team and the board and make general counsel your best friend and talk to them about how do you want me to help you answer those questions about ESG. We don't have to wait to be asked, and we shouldn't wait to be asked for that. That it is, in fact, part of our responsibility. That's my soapbox. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Marnie, absolutely correct. I think one of the things I ask when I talk to a CISO about working with the board is the first question I ask is, how often do you report to the board? If you're in front of the board every quarter, like my CISO is to me, then you're pretty good. You are one of the first class items. And if you're not, then you have to say, okay, why doesn't the board want to know about cybersecurity posture every quarter? And is that a strategy review that the board should be looking at? Is where do you put in terms of priority items, where does cybersecurity lie for this company?